Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Department of English, Sourashtra College, I welcome you all to this virtual platform. I welcome the key speaker, Professor Himadri Lakri. Welcome you, sir. So I would like to give you instructions to the participants. Participants, kindly turn off your videos. Turn off your video. And I can see few participants presenting their screen. Shubhan Khan, please stop presenting the screen. Participants, kindly turn off your audio and video. Shubhan Khan, Kindly stop presenting your screen. Participants, kindly turn off your video. Professor, actually the participants are coming in and we are admitting them. So we
Okay,
shall wait for a few more minutes.
no problem at all. No problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor. Once again, I make a request. Participants, kindly turn off your audio and video. Pratana Ben, can you please turn off your video? Vashna Chaudhary, please turn off your video.
சவுண்ட் கேட்கல. அது கேட்கல போட்டேன். உங்க என்ன வீடியோ ஆன் பண்ணாத. மைக்ரோஃபோன் ஆன் பண்ணுமா? Do branding and you are
Hello. Madam? Hello. Hello.
On behalf of the Department of English, Sourashtra College, I welcome our principal, Professor Ennett Saravanan, to this virtual webinar. Welcome you, sir.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. Okay. Thank you. Hello.
Sir,
சொல்லுங்க மேடம். Shall we start, ma'am?
sir, we could wait for another 2 more minutes. We are
Sure.
getting participants
Okay.
still.
Sure.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Hello. Hello. Madam, play on. Hello.
Sir,
Some sound be there. Did you hear it?
okay, let me check it, sir. Let me check
Oh,
it.
okay. Somebody is running somewhere. That step sound.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I welcome you all here in this virtual platform. I extend my sincere thanks to the participants for their continued support, guidance, and suggestions. You are the pillar of our support. It is you who make this virtual event a pleasant reality. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the management of Sourashtra College, especially Dr. D.R. Kumaresh, the Secretary, for his continued support and unconditional assistance in all our academic endeavors. He always believes learning should not get stopped in any way. I welcome you, sir. I would like to deem it a privilege in welcoming our Professor N.H. Saravanan, the principal in charge of our college. Sir, you are there with us in all our efforts, inspiring us and motivating us. I welcome you, sir, for this another innovative virtual endeavor of our college. I proceed with welcoming Dr. M.R. Rashila, Head Department of English, Sourashtra College, and all the well-wishers who have been instrumental in the organization of this webinar. I close my welcome address by welcoming all the participants both on Google Meet and YouTube live streaming, and I request you to continue to support us in all our enterprises of the future. Thank you, and I welcome you one and all. Here we go. I invite our principal to introduce the key speaker, Dr. Himadri Lahiri, a poet, author, and professor, to inaugurate this national webinar on the topic Home and Homeland in South Asian Diasporic Literature. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Good evening to everyone. I welcome today's session. Today's webinar is a home and homeland in South Asian diasporic literature. I'm glad to introduce the key speaker, Dr. Himadri Lahiri. He is a former professor, Department of English and Culture Studies, University of Bourbon, West Bengal. Now, he is a professor of English at the School of Humanities, Netaji Subhash Open University, Kolkata. He wrote extensively diaspora studies, post-colonial studies, and Indian English literature. His latest publication in Diaspora Theory and Translation, namely Hyderabad Orient Black Swan in the year 2019, Contemporary Indian English Poetry and Drama. Moreover, he is co-edited by himself, has also been published recently. He writes books, reviews for newspapers and academic journals. He got award from Olive I. Redrick Prize by the Indo-American Center for International Studies in the year 2001. Also, he got a fellow of Salzburg Seminar American Studies Alumni Association, Salzburg Seminar Austria in the year 2006. I hand over to the session to the key speaker, Dr. Lahiri. Thank you, sir. Hello. Madam, can you switch over to key speaker?
Professor, okay, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. We
Now
can.
it is audible.
Hello? Can you hear
It is
me?
audible. Yes,
Yes, sir, we
Okay.
can hear you.
yes, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to be present here in this webinar. It's always a pleasure to meet colleagues and friends and students, of course. So I think this would be a kind of interactive session. I have given you a PPT. Can that be shown along with my presentation? That would help the audience, members of the audience, to have some
No, sir,
ideas
I'll
about
present it now.
along with this presentation. That would be wonderful if you can do it.
Okay, sir, I'll present it.
So, as you know that today's thrust of my talk will be home and homeland in South Asian diasporic literature. there are two very important words, home and homeland, in the presentation. And along with that, you see South Asian literature as a component of world literature that's also here. So we need to clarify certain ideas about what we mean by South Asia, what we mean by diasporic literature, and what we mean by home and homeland. So there are certain ideas to be clarified before I go into the analysis of the text, before I start talking about the texts proper. So you see that, next slide please. You see that we need to have a very clear idea about the concept of South Asia. Next slide please. You know that what happens is that the South Asian, when we say South Asian literature or South Asian diasporic literature, we bundle this out and you see that we need to have a very clear idea about the map. We in India or somebody in Pakistan or Afghanistan or Bangladesh, we do not usually think in terms of South Asia. We think in terms of our own nation, India or Bangladesh or Nepal or whatever it may be. So why is it that such a kind of idea is floated in the critical circle? Of course, you see that we have been, as a post-colonial nation, we inherited certain critical terms as well. Okay, and South Asia is one such term. And later on in the area studies, which was very much there in the 1970s and 1980s, in the area studies, South Asia became a very important component. And South Asia is also intricately connected with the ideas associated with what we called Orientalism. I will try to specify some of the areas which might be associated with these ideas, and you can see this picture, this map very, very clearly. When we say South Asia, the biggest component is of course India, and sometimes therefore when we say South Asia or an American says South Asia, he or she immediately equates India with South Asia, and that is not correct. And to this point, many of the subjects, many of the people from the other components of South Asia have really objected. Okay, so for example, you know, in Manjushree Thapar's novel, very well-known novel, Seasons of Light, we'll find that in the beginning there is a conversation between two persons, and we find that one of the persons is very much curious about the location of Nepal, and that American cannot pronounce Nepal properly. He confuses it with Naples, which is in Europe, and he basically thinks that Nepal is very much part of India. So such ignorance actually actually exists in many, many areas. So South Asia is a very problematical concept, but when we start talking about South Asian literature, I will have this idea of as a problematic one in my presentation. Okay, so you see the countries that is very much there, components of South Asia: India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan. These are the countries which usually are bundled together when we use the term South Asia. Next slide, please. You will find that South Asia conventionally does includes these countries, but then there are problems because there are actually often crossings of boundaries. When you think of Nepal, for example, there are intersections, so much common points, cultural commonalities between the Nepalese and the Indians, parts of India, for example, that the borderlines, drawing of the borderlines sometimes poses problems for cultural understanding of the places. And that is why you see that Bibhas Chaudhuri, I have quoted him here, you can see it. He says that two landscapes, Afghanistan and Tibet, are generally excluded in the overreaching narratives of South Asian history. But at the same time, you see that in the same way, Afghanistan and Nepal are also problematized. So the entire landscape may better be conceived in terms of culture rather than in terms of territory. So the nations, there are different nations, but the nations often interact in much more meaningful way than we in India, for example, interact with between ourselves. So you see, we have very close affinities between the two countries, for example, Bangladesh and West Bengal. Culturally, they are very similar. Okay, and we have we inherited the same lineage of literature. So the cultural borders, imposing a cultural borderlines is rather very difficult. So with this point in mind, I will rather proceed. Somebody says that I am not very much clearly audible. I hope my voice can reach you. Next slide, please. So you see, my point is that we may think of South Asia rather as a cultural unit rather than a kind of territorial divisions. And the point is that the divisions are true, the borderlines are there, but even then we often cross the borderlands, and in our literatures we have actually presented, we find many points of intersections as we find points of differences. So when in the diaspora, the term South Asia is pronounced, when it is uttered, articulated, what happens is that they take it as a kind of a bundle of certain identities. They often homogenize us, and therefore what is very important is that we should fight against this homogenization. We should have very clearly in mind that South Asia may be very much clear idea for many foreigners, but they must keep in mind, as we should keep in mind, that it is a heterogeneous zone, territorial zone, where there are many countries, many nations. There are differences, but there are points of intersections as well. So this is my explanation of the term South Asia, and we must now proceed to think about South Asian diasporic literature. Okay? So as you know, this is mainly for the students who may be very new to this area. Diaspora, as you know, when you think of it, it has the etymological origin in dia, which means across, and spirein, which means scattering. So basically it means scattering of seeds. Okay? So the term, the point seed is very interesting because seed grows. Seed also requires accustomed earth. Unless and until there is an accustomed earth, and you can easily understand that I'm referring to Jhumpa Lahiri's collection of short stories. So you see that the metaphor of the earth is very much there, and you need to scatter the seeds over there, and the scattering of seeds are across many areas. So what happens is that it is a botanical metaphor. A botanical metaphor that speaks of scattering, that speaks of growth that implies the existence of some kind of growth into saplings and then into tree and then flowering, and you can get many kinds of fruits. So it is basically a botanical metaphor which was then taken as a very important concept in sociological studies and then in literary studies as well. But then we should think of the word diaspora as an umbrella term, because this umbrella term includes many identities. For example, you include into it immigrants, you include into it refugees, you include into it exilic persons, you include different other kinds of persons who are derooted, who have been moving from one place to another. And from that point of view, it is very important that we should understand the term diaspora as not a homogeneous, as encompassing homogeneous entities, but as encompassing different kind of identities, like the immigrants, like the refugees, like the exilic persons, etc., etc. So from that point of view, diaspora is a big term, a term having a big expanse of connotations and denotations. But we should be aware that it is not only a scattering from India to the US or UK or Australia for that matter, but it also includes suggestions of gathering. So previously we were actually much more conscious about scattering than gathering. Scattering suggests a kind of an isolation, but then gathering suggests a kind of consolidation. So diaspora should be understood in terms of both scattering and gathering, as a group of people, as a community of people gathering at one place, being uprooted from another, which is their ancestral country. And from that ancestral country, they travel to a new space, and there they consolidate their presence, they interact with the people of that country, and gradually through social, cultural, and economic acculturations, they become part of that country. So my point is that diaspora is not only a scattering, it is widely gathered as, it is widely conceived as a gathering also. Recently, I wrote a book called Diasporic Theory and Transnationalism, which was published in 2019, where I tried to define the term in this following fashion. And I quote, diaspora is a social formation outside the nation of origin. It is not only a social formation, but it is also a cultural formation. Okay? It is a phenomenon involving uprooting, forced or voluntary, of a mass of people from the homeland, and their rerouting in the host land. So you get several stages, and you get account of certain spaces like homeland and the host land. You get concepts like that. But this is basically an ethno-national kind of migration, a group of people who move from one country to another and form a community. Okay, this has been going on for a long time, and therefore diaspora is an old term, but we have begun our studies of diaspora mainly from 1980s onwards, when it became a very important kind of study, and it was amalgamated in social sciences and later literature departments and cultural studies departments. Okay, so diaspora is a concept that involves uprooting from a particular accustomed space, and then it is a kind of rerouting into a different kind of unaccustomed space, unaccustomed are, where ultimately the new people, this community, members of this community, settle and ultimately become part and parcel of the new nation. Next slide, please. So you see that this, in the process of this movement from one country to another, this is not just a territorial movement, this is not just a physical movement, but this is a cultural movement as well, a psychological movement as well. And in the process of this movement, what happens is that people become translated people. Homi Bhabha talks about this translation, which is he discusses mainly in the context of cultural translation. But then you see that translated people, the translation basically conveys the sense of carrying over. Okay, so carrying over means a transformation, but this transformation actually includes the cultural segments of the origin or the originary space or the originary culture, and also the culture of the new space, the destination, and therefore ultimately hybridity is formed. People, when they settle in a particular space, particular country, the diasporic space for quite some time, what happens is that they ultimately, whether willingly or unwillingly, they become translated being, they become transformed being, they become hybrid beings, and they remain in between spaces. They remain in between spaces for quite some time. We cannot say how long it will take for quite assimilation or acculturation. I obviously want to distinguish between terms like assimilation and acculturation. We usually use the term as acculturation, but we should very carefully use the term assimilation with much care, because assimilation suggests that you give up your own identity and you get assimilated into, merged into a different culture, the culture of the host country. And therefore, it suggests a kind of giving up of your own cultural identity, the identity of the originary culture. So this ultimately is a very wonderful kind of a idea of translation, the idea of being carried over, the idea of the changing cultural norms. But then when we think of the diaspora, we used to think it in terms of origin and destination. I will come to the point later on. I will try to establish the point that the division between the origin and the destination ultimately becomes very problematic, because the divisionary lines, the lines of division, the boundary lines become really, really fuzzy. They become problematical. I will come to that. And in the process of diaspora studies, when we stand right now in 2020, we think in terms of multiplicity. We think in terms of not only one homeland, but multiple homelands. We think of homelands not in terms of singularity, but in terms of multiplicity. I will come to that one, but in the meantime, I will just try to drive home the point how the concept of the travel is very much intrinsic to the word diaspora, because the diaspora suggests this journey, and this journey actually causes the scattering of the seeds, the scattering of your own cultural points, the cultural ideas, etc., etc. But I will point out that Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni has written one interesting collection of poems, which is Leaving University, New and Selected Poems, which was published in 1997. you see that in that collection there is one particular poem which there are very interesting 7 poems of the same theme, suggesting the arrival and then consolidation, then acculturation, and then a kind of an assimilation. Different poem, each poem speaks of one particular stage in the process of this journey, which is both physical and metaphorical, both physical and cultural. And from the collection, I select one poem, The Brides Come to University, where the lines run like this: labeled in our mother's hesitant hands, packets of seeds, methi, karela, saag. I cannot read it. I don't get the entire stretch of the PPT, so I can't read the. I miss one. Right. Thank you. Labeled in our mother's hands, packets of seeds, methi, karela, saag, to burst from this new soil like green stars. You see that here. You see the mother's hand suggesting your ancestral culture, your ancestral country, your home there. And when you start your journey on the ship, your mother packets and sends certain packets of methi, karela, saag with you. So you take note of the particular kind of seeds, and we understand the location of the place in India. It's in North India, specifically in Punjab, from where a group of women are journeying to the US, to North America. And they're taking with them some seeds, and these seeds will be scattered in the new spaces, which is America. So I'm sure there, as Chitra Banerjee Debakaruni says, there in the new soil, going through the new weather conditions, these seeds will burst forth in the form of new plantation, okay, in the forms of new saplings and ultimately trees, and bear fruits, suggesting transplantation of the native culture into something very different in the new spaces. So this poem suggests, actually speaks of this journey in terms of the etymological origin of the word diaspora. Next slide, please. So from that point of view, you see that there are so wonderfully, Debakaruni brings out the nuances of the journey. And this journey is not only a physical journey, but also a metaphorical journey, change of your culture and the transformation of your identity in the new space. Now, I would just want to differentiate between the two terms, which are often used interchangeably, but there are certain nuanced differences between the two terms. And I would just point out point this out specifically for the young students, the PG students or the UG students, who need to go into further details and examine the two terms, diaspora and transnationalism. These two terms are used interchangeably almost, but there are nuanced differences between them. I have a quotation here, and this quotation, I believe, will explain the basic differences between the term, and I will talk about this for a minute or two, and then shift on to the next area. Okay, you see that diaspora is Jana Evans Brazil and Anita Manor in their introduction to their book, wonderful book, Theorizing Diaspora. This is a quotation from them, and this is a quotation which says, diaspora has a human-centered approach, a human phenomenon, lived and experienced, while transnationalism is associated with larger more impersonal forces, specifically those of globalization and global capitalism. So, very interestingly, you see that although we can really study these two terms and these two terms together under the diaspora studies, but we need to have a very clear idea about the differences also, because when we study diaspora from the location of our literature departments or cultural studies departments, we basically discuss diaspora, and we basically discuss from the point of view of humanities. We consider the movement and the transformation and the acculturation from the point of view of human movement of human beings, formation of the human beings into social bodies and cultural bodies, ethno-national bodies. But then you see there is another aspect, especially in economics. You see that transnationalism is used in a different sense, where it has an economy-centered approach, where the homeland and the host land, there is no differences between them. They are concerned basically with the movement of the capital and human beings as capital. Okay, so human beings are seen as capital. When you take a group of people from India, from Kerala, for example, to UAE, United Arab Emirates, you look at the group of community of people not just as a community, cultural community, but as a tool of economic movement, as a tool of capitalism. So you see, and this is possible from the 1990s when globalization came in a big way, and you see global capitalism became the order of the day. So this transnationalism, although it is still used as in the etymological sense of transnation and transnationalism, beyond the nation, although you can think in terms of people moving beyond the nation, but then when we say transnationalism, we basically use it as part of a capital movement, even if the capital takes the form of human beings. So the basic difference is that when we study diaspora in literature departments, we study is as a human phenomenon. We have a human-centered approach. We think the human experiences, lived experiences that they all undergo as human beings and communities. But then when we talk about transculturalism, we basically talk about as a movement of capital. Okay, so the human aspect is not given that much importance. So one of the critics, I've forgotten the name of the critic, transnationalism and diaspora and transnationalism, they are awkward partners. I have written an article on that, elaborating on the differences between awkward diaspora and transnationalism. You can access it if you like. It is available on the in the internet. So if you are interested to study this, you can have an approach there, because I felt that many of us do not consider the differences very, very carefully. And I feel that this difference should be taken note of, although we can use both the study, both transnationalism and diaspora, within the diaspora studies. Okay, so many other people have talked about this aspect, but I feel that not everyone may be very conscious about the differences. So on my part, I have tried to differentiate these two terms and also tried to point out, elaborate on the areas where these two terms both intersects and diverge. So next slide, please. I feel that when we begin our study of home and homeliness and homing desire and homeland and the hostland, we keep these in mind. And I would like to point out that although we have a lot of examples, literary examples of diasporic literary works, there are very, very few literary works, either short stories or novels, on what you can call transnationalism. Perhaps new kinds of writings are coming, which are written against the background of the movement of the transnational people. So there, some kind of new literary emergence of new literature we may kindly come across in the future. But right at the moment, as far as I am aware, not many poems or short stories or novels have been written from this point of view. But there may be some, and there may be some, I'm not very much aware of that. I have come across transnational points of view in certain areas, but that is very much in fragment. Okay. So let me come to the basic thrust of my presentation today. My purpose is just to present certain points which might make you think over some of the basic issues of diaspora, and some of these points may not have been properly explained in the literature on diasporic studies. So that is why I am raising certain points like this, and you may go on, specifically the research scholars, we may go on explaining and investigating these aspects and elaborate further. I'll be waiting for that. So you see, let me come to the point of homeland and hostland problem. Now, often the words home and homeland, they are used interchangeably, and it is very difficult to differentiate between the two terms because they are used in the same breath almost. Your homeland is your home as well. So your home, by the word home, desh, by the word desh, you may also refer to your homeland. So I'm not going to differentiate between the two terms, home and homeland, much, but I will like to explain this much, that unless and until there is a sense of pleasure, sense of security, sense of homeliness, sense of belongingness, there cannot be any home. So it is a different matter altogether whether your source of pleasure, your source of security is something you find security in some particular object or particular idea, and a different person find it in a different object altogether. But in order to call something home, this idea of belongingness, this idea of this sense of security must be there. It must be a desired space. Otherwise, it cannot be a home. Okay? And if you are in the US or UK or UAE or in Australia or in Malaysia, if you don't have this sense of desired space, this sense of belongingness, the hostland will always be a hostland. It will never become a homeland. So you see, these boundaries are blurred, And a hostland can also become a homeland depending on the conditions of a particular diasporic subject or a particular community. So you see, the conditions of the Jews for centuries together have been, they have been in a kind of exile, because in no place did they found the conditions homely. Everything, everywhere, the conditions were uncanny, and they were hounded like anything. So therefore, they focused on the creation of their homeland in Israel, which came true in the 1940s. So unless and until that moment, there was no homeland, to tell you frankly, for the Jewish people. But then after the creation of Israel, it did not become the only homeland for the Jewish people. There were other homelands also. I will come to this point a bit later. In the process of the journey that I have already spoken of, you have obviously a sense of loss and gain. This is the translation, the process of translation. When you translate something from Malayalam into English, you lose some of the senses of the Malayalam, and you gain some of the senses of English or Bengali or whichever target language you may have. So in the process of the language and the culture moving from one place to another, what happens is that you lose something, some of your cultural components, but in the process you also gain something. So you also make up your loss, the absence of the homeland, the absence of the home culture, absence of the home, the environment of the homeland. For example, in your home, what you may do is that you plant some trees or saplings or something which will give you the semblance of a real material home space in the diasporic space as well. You see that many Bengali people, after the partition, they moved to Andamans. From what is now Bangladesh, they moved to Andamans. And in the Andamans, they recreated homeland of the Bangladeshi circumstances, of the East Pakistani situation, by planting coconut trees, by planting other plants and trees, and making the place very much habitable from cultural points of view. So you see that the process of creating the homeland is a metaphysical, metaphorical process as well. And when you find yourself in Andaman or in the US or in any country for that matter, what happens is that you make up the loss by inventing something. It may be an invention of your new place, an invention of the old culture in new form, or you may go to the host culture and borrow some ideas, some cultural facts, which can replenish your identity in the new land. So in the process, you become a hybrid personality. The lack is compensated. The lack that you feel because of the loss of the homeland qualities, homeland cultural traits, you gain through your imaginary, either tapping into your imagination, the resources of the homeland which you have left behind, or the resources of the new land, the host land, which you now pick up, choose, and plant in your own identity. So this process is a continuous process. How long this process will go, we never know. It is a continuum, and it is concretized through, at a particular moment of time, by imagining yourself into as being one particular kind of identity. So you see that in this way, the vacuum and the vacuum and this sense of loss is compensated in a big way. This gap, as I have told in another point, is compensated through the cultural practices, performances of the cultural practices. And that is why in Naipaul's novels, you will find that there are gods or goddesses of India being worshipped there, even in the Caribbean islands, in Guyana or in any other country also. So it is the performances of the cultural icons and the cultural practices that give you a sense of being home. So this homeliness, the new place also becomes, the host land also becomes your homeland in that sense. So right now, you can really think of the homeland and the hostland as a very problematic concepts which are often interchanged, which change, which is not static from that point of view. Let me move on to the next point. The concept of diaspora embodies a subtext of home. This is what Akhtar Bra says in Cartographies of Diaspora. She says that. And another critic, Fremke Stock, in a book called Concepts, Diasporas, Concepts, Intersections, Identities. In this particular book, details have been given there. If anyone is interested, you can note down this point. This is a very good book, especially for the students and research scholars. And here he says at the core of the concept of diaspora lies the image of a remembered home. Please note the phrase remembered. And here you go to Rushdie's imaginary homelands, okay, where he says that for the diasporic people, the homelands are imaginary, because in the meantime, homelands have changed a lot. When Rushdie left India, it was a different kind of a homeland. In his mind, that image of the homeland still sticks, although homeland in the meantime has changed a lot. And the diasporic subject is not aware of that or does not want to admit that. And the diasporic subject cannot access the homeland in toto, but he accesses the homeland through imagination, through fragments of imagination, through shards of imagination. That is what Rushdie says in his essay, wonderful essays, Imaginary Homelands. So homelands is basically there, and the homeland concept you will have to approach not through a binary of homeland and hostland, but as a very a concept that is not stable, the concepts which are really moving and changing, and therefore the hostland can as well be a homeland, and from one hostland you may move to another hostland. Jhumpa Lahiri, for example, has moved from the US to Italy and has written to produce 2 books from there. So you see, the Italy becomes a new hostland, but Italy may become, or it has become, a homeland as well for Jhumpa Lahiri. So you see, we cannot see homeland hostland binary in the way we saw it in the 1990s and even in the first decade of this century. So please remember that we need to approach homeland hostland binary from a different perspective altogether right now. Next slide, please. So homeland, although it is, as you already can think, usually explained in terms of a bounded territory. And this boundary territory is left behind and remembered. Okay? And you have just emotional attachment, you have ancestral memory. For the first generation, it is very difficult to tear any members of the first generation from this emotional attachment and ancestral memory. So, Lilia in Jhumpa Lahiri's story, when Mr. Pirzada came to dine, says, when my parents use the word homeland or desh, they refer to India. Although it is totally different thing for Lilia, the daughter, who is born and brought up in the new country. So it depends on the generation as well. You cannot globalize the concept. You cannot homogenize the concept. So homeland, hostland become relatives. Relativity is there. They are relative concepts, and generation factors is very much there. And those of you who are refugees, for example, or dissident intellectuals, for example, who are forced to leave their own country, their homelands, their idea of homeland and the hostland may differ from the common run of the diasporic subjects. Because for them, remembering the homeland, for example, there are many refugees who had fled Iran or who are moving from certain West European countries right now. They are moving to, they have moved to Europe. So you see, for these peoples, for these refugees, for these exilic persons, the dissident intellectuals, it may be a bit difficult to remember their homelands very, very favorably, because their experiences are different. They may not have that kind of attachment. They think of an ideal homeland, but that ideal homeland may be absent. And for them, the society in the homeland may not be very, very pleasant. On the contrary, for them, the new place may be a better place. And therefore, they may like to lay their roots in the new space, and the new space, the hostland, will become a homeland for them if they do that. And here I quote from, you see, William Safran, a very important critic whose essay, who has written on the mythic homeland in 1991, which was published in the diaspora, in the journal called Diaspora, which was initiated in 1991. He talked about 1991, but here in this quotation, he seems to have shifted his position. I will talk about that. And organizers, please, can I take 15 minutes more or 20 minutes more if you allow? Please
Yes,
come
please.
to, okay. Whether the home is necessarily the original homeland is a matter of controversy. It may in fact not be ancestral homeland at all, but rather the place where one was born and raised, but that was originally a hostland, that is a diaspora. So something that I was actually talking about, this is found in William Safran's, this point. He has moved away from his 1991 essay where he spoke of the mythic homeland, and he gave many some characteristic features of the diaspora in terms of homeland. So from that point of view, you must keep in mind, and I believe it is very important, you may differ with me, that the homeland hostland concept must be taken with a pinch of salt, because they are not stable entities. They are not stable kind of labels, and there are much movements within. So it depends on very specific kind of ideas, specific the person who is moving. Okay. Now, next slide, please. I hope you have some ideas about what I want to call homeland. I will quote again from Dr. Bra, who has said, on the one hand, home is a mythic place of desire in the diasporic imagination. In this sense, it is a place of no return, even if it is possible to visit the geographical territory that is seen as a place of origin. Okay? So on the one hand, home is a mythic place of desire. You may desire it, but you never return to that place. Okay? You may be in New Zealand right now, a diasporic person there, but for you, India already has become a mythic place. Okay? Where you may return really in body, but you may not actually feel at home here. Okay, so this is there. I will give you one or two examples. These examples are might be very important for you. I will come to that a bit later. On the other hand, home is also the lived experience of a locality. And please give your attention to this part. On the other hand, home is also the lived experience of a locality. Its sounds and smells, its heat and dust, balmy summer evenings, or the excitement of the first snowfall, shivering winter evenings, somber gray skies in the middle of the day. All this, as mediated by the historically specific everyday of social interactions, social relations. So your present location is very important. Whether you are targets of racism in England or America or any other place for that matter. If you are target of racism, you may not think that particular place as your homeland. It is your host land, but it may not be your host homeland. So the exact location and how you feel in that particular location is very important. But then it is clear that the homeland that you have already left has become a mythic place where you may not want to go back again. Okay, this is more so for the second generation and the third generation. All the first generation people want to go back, and some may even go back. There may be returnees, but those who have settled for more than 1 decade or two, they hardly come back. India becomes a mythic place, an imaginary homeland. And therefore, it is very, very interesting from that point of view. Next slide, please. So the question of the belonging is basically linked up with the question of belongingness. So how much you belong to that? Next slide, please. How much you belong to that? That is very, very important. Okay. Next slide, please. I will give you some the titles of some book which are written by some wonderful writers, Indo-Fijians or Indo-Caribbeans, or for that matter, any of the old countries that they were transported into. But before I come to this text, I cannot dwell on this text but in detail, but I think the students or research scholars or those of you who feel interested in these areas, they may think of Kalapani crossings, the indentured laborer movement. You can think of the Girimetias, okay? This is a wonderful area for researchers, and I will ask you to do some research in this area. Just a minute, please, for replenishing my battery actually. Just kind of wait for a minute. I shall just refer to Sudesh Mishra, who is a descendant of the Kuli diaspora. Kuli diaspora that took place in the 19th century India. It started right from the 19th century, early 19th century. Eventually, in practice, it started from 1837 or something like that, and continued up to the 20th century. And coolies, persons who were called coolies, they were actually indentured laborers. They moved from, most of them were subalterns. Most of them were from the rural India, basically from north of India, but many went from the South India as well, from Madras particularly, through the Madras port, and many of them went to Southeast Asia. And that is why you can account for why there are so many Indians and South Indians, for that matter, in different South Asian countries like Singapore or Malaysia or places like that. So this was the result of the Kuli diaspora. I would right now talk about Sudesh Mishra's idea about how to approach a particular diaspora, in which he talked about three categories. Number one, dual territory, where you think of in terms of binary, which I have already discussed. I'm not going into that. You think in terms of situational laterality or multipolar approach, where you think both the conditions in the diaspora and in the homeland as equally important. Okay, so you don't privilege one over the other. And the third point is very important for me, archival specificity, by which he means that you should search for archaeology of specific diaspora. Okay, to which diaspora does it belong? Okay, you cannot equate this diaspora with post-colonial diaspora. This is a Kuli diaspora. And most of the post-colonial diaspora is the cyber Kuli diaspora. There is a huge differentiation between these two diasporas. So you need to be very specific about how to approach and which diaspora for that matter. Here, class, caste, all these things matter as well as the specific time of your movement. Okay. So this is a particularist approach, and this approach is historically very specific, very particularist, and this is a correction to the earlier two diasporas. Now you see there are some books. This is a book, history book, but I will, next slide please. Just see this is another book. This is a literature book, a novel. This is called Jahajin. It was written by Peggy Mohon in 2000. I've forgotten the exact date. It might be 2007 or 2008. Okay, wonderful book of retrieval narrative. Next slide, please. The Swinging Bridge. This is also a wonderful book. It is written by Espinet, Ramabai Espinet. Okay, so this is probably written in 2013 or 14. Next slide, please. We Mark Your Memory. This is a collection of essays, poems, short stories this is published in very recently, probably 2019 or 2020 probably, and it is edited by David Davidin and some other co-editors. Okay, so all these books. Next slide, please. I cannot go back to these books in detail, but I will draw your attention to the existence of these books because these are not usually given much importance. This is a book. These are the books which are basically retrieval narratives. Brij Bhilal, for example, have written a book called The Other Side of Midnight, therefore suggesting the 19th century and early 20th century diaspora, which is the Coolie diaspora. This Coolies diaspora was introduced after the abolition of slavery, and this is a different kind of a slavery altogether, but these people had to sign an agreement. And since these people were not literate, they were ignorant people, and they couldn't pronounce the term agreement properly. So Girmitia, the term Girmitia, actually evolved over this term, and these people were ultimately came to be known as Girmitia people. They are Girmitias, okay, and this diaspora is called Girmitia diaspora. So you will have to have a particularist approach when you think of this diaspora. When you think of Jhumpa Lahiri, you will have to take a different approach altogether. Otherwise, there will be a lot of problem. Okay, so they started from either Madras or from Kolkata, and they moved through Indian Oceans and then Indian Ocean. I'm sorry, most of them Bay of Bengal, and then to Indian Ocean and to Atlantic Ocean, and then they reach different islands, plantation economies like Fiji, like Caribbean islands, Mauritius, etc., etc. So they moved through this route, and through this route actually traveled to 2 months, 3 months, and wonderful. So probably my time is almost over. I do not know how much time I can have. Let me have 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then I will move on to at the end. Probably there is not much time. Next slide, please. So this diaspora is basically for this diaspora. What is important is that for them, they think of the homeland. But all these people actually either fled homeland or driven away from homeland. They were either prostitutes or they were driven away from the homeland. And therefore, for them, homeland does not have the same kind of idea as the post-colonial people. So these people transformed when they were on their journey through the seas in the Jahaj, in the ship itself, they formed friendship and they formed terms like Jahaji Bhais and Jahaji Bahins. Okay, so for them, you see, the homeland had totally different connotations. You cannot have, they made Fiji their own homelands. They made the Caribbean islands, Guyana or any island for that matter, their own homelands. And from them, they moved on to Australia or to Canada or to the US. So they have serial diasporas, and the next generations, they are the new diasporic people there. They have multiple generations in their kitty. Next slide, please. So this is one kind of diaspora I have talked about. Please, for these people, remember that the homeland and the hostland have a totally different kind of. And when Sudesh Misro and Gayatri Bahadur made their trips, they called it pilgrimage, to India in order to retrieve the history of their mothers, foremothers, and forefathers. They tried to locate their villages, ancestral villages, But then ultimately they could not find the same kind of warmth in the same people. So they never thought of the ancestral land as the homeland. Okay, I will move to some other texts like Monikali's Brick Lane, where the main character Chanu, which is the post-colonial diaspora, and it is a Monikal is originally ancestrally is of Bangladeshi origin. You'll find that the concept of the homeland is different according to the person, diasporic person himself. Okay, so there are some characters, for example, Chanu, who is the main character, and this Chanu was a failed immigrant. Although he had degrees from Dhaka University and felt that he will be accepted as a very well-educated person in England, he was not. Therefore, he felt that he was a target of racism, and therefore for him, England never became a homeland. Ultimately, he returned to homeland, privileging it, inventing a golden past for the homeland, the Bangladesh or the former India for that matter, and went back to his ancestral land, Bangladesh. So for him, homeland, coastland was a different matter. For Korean, Bangladesh became a homeland because he felt he has been again a victim of racism, and therefore, and he was a religious fanatic, and for him he felt that Bangladesh can be an ideal place for practice of the religion, which he cannot do in England proper. Okay, here, therefore, you have a different version of the homeland and hostland. Most importantly, Nazneen and for a daughter, gender factors matters, and they did not want to go back to Bangladesh, which they thought as a country, as a patriarchal country, and they thought that in Bangladesh, they can never have their own female agency. The female agency they can exercise in England, and therefore they refuse to go back to Bangladesh. And therefore, for these people, Bangladesh never became a homeland. It was an ancestral land, but ultimately England became the homeland. I thought of actually talked about some other texts, but I feel I have overrun my time, and therefore I will like to stop here. And if you have questions, I will try to answer them. And in the process, I can bring in other texts as well. And please, organizers, if you feel like that my time is over, I should finish here, and then on to the question of the question.
Participants, it is the time for discussion. So if you have any questions, kindly post it on the chat box. Sir, there is a question from Abhirami. Can you differentiate diaspora, transnationalism, globalization, and multiculturalism?
You see that the pair is diaspora and transnationalism. You can form a pair there. But globalization and what else did you say? Globalization and acculturation. These are different.
Multiculturalism, Professor.
Multiculturalism. These are different things altogether. these are policies, okay? These are policies, economic policies and state policies. As to the differences between the diaspora and transnationalism, I have made it very specifically. I have explained very specifically. One depends on for diaspora studies, the approach is basically human-centered. So you see the human beings as cultural beings, as human beings, and therefore that becomes diaspora. But transnationalism is a term which has overt economic connotations. So from that point of view, there are nuanced differences. Both actually talk about movement, but one talks about, diaspora talks about movement of human beings as human beings, but transnationalism talks of movement of human beings as capital and movements of capital proper, like money. And money does not need any boundary. It can move on through technological means. You can transfer your money, your capital, no problem at all. So you see, these are the two differences. But then you see, globalization is a new concept. Okay, this has aided and created problems for this diaspora and transnationalism. But this is a policy. Globalization which is closely allied with transnationalism. The motor is globalization. Transnationalism moves because it has the thrust from globalization. But you see, multiculturalism is a term which is used in the context of a particular nation. What kind of policy would you actually take? Do you think that a particular community, particular race will have the hegemony? Or do you think that there will be multiple spaces for the different cultural communities, different racial communities, different ethnic communities? So you see, that policy is called, in a public space, in multiculturalism, everybody has the equal space. If you have one particular religion to practices at your home. Don't try to practice it in the open spaces, okay, in the public spaces. That is why you see the problems about the Punjabis, the Sikhs wearing headgears, and Muslims wearing other semiotic dresses. You see, the problem is that the Western people thought that this is not the proper place. If you have religion to practice, move within and practice religion. But there are problems in this kind of multicultural concepts, arguments. I'm not going into that, but I believe I have tried to explain the four concepts that the listener has raised. Thank you.
Professor, next question is from Nadu. Does the literature written in English from Japan, China, Malaysia, and Korea come under South Asian diaspora? If no, then how is this literature called?
I don't get the question exactly. Would you repeat, please? There's a microphone the problem of microphone, I suppose. Anyway, what I would like to catch the question.
Does the literature written in English from Japan, China,
Yes.
Malaysia, and Korea come under South Asian diaspora?
Come
If
from?
no, then
Come
how is
from
this
which?
literature called?
I have a problem in getting the question, but then you see, if you mentioned certain countries, and there are obviously some literary works written in English. Problem: who are writing that? The basic question is, who are writing that? So if it is an Indian expatriate or Indian immigrant who is writing in Japan, of course that will be an immigrant literature or diasporic literature, no problem in that. It may be in Malaysia, it may be in China. So the basic question is, who is writing and what is his identity? Has he or she undergone a kind of a movement from one country to another? So if he or she moves from one country to another, and the product that is produced in the new country will certainly be a product of diasporic literature. But then there is a question here. So even that country, the host country, calls these literary works by the diasporic people as American literature or British literature. And therefore, you see, Jhumpa Lahiri as much belongs to Indian literature as she belongs to American literature. So I hope you got my point. I answered your question.
The next question is from Jyoti. Is expatriate literature similar to diasporic literature? Is expatriate literature similar to diasporic literature?
Okay, as I told earlier, diaspora is an umbrella term. Okay, an umbrella term which includes many ideas. For example, many categories of people. For example, immigrants. For example, expatriates. For example, people who are in exiles, refugees. The basic difference between immigrant and the expatriate people, these are technical terms, mind that. And Bharati Mukherjee, in a foreword to Darkness and Other Stories, has pinned down the differences, and I accept her differentiation. She says that immigrants have joys of acceptance of the new country. They celebrate the acceptance of the new country, the diasporic space. Expatriates come for some time and they want to go back to their own country again. So they cannot celebrate the new country. Okay, this is the differentiation, the differences that Bharati Mukherjee has made. And if you look at the story, when Mr. Pirzada came to dine, and if you have read the story, you will find Mr. Pirzada himself cannot participate in the events of the, he has curiosity, but he cannot really belong to the new space. He constantly goes back to his own space, which is Bangladesh. He even keeps 2 watches. His wristwatch maintains the American time, and his pocket watch has a different time zone. Okay, it indicates the Bangladeshi time. So he wants to take both the time, even though he is not in Bangladesh. He keeps Bangladeshi time in mind. So Bangladesh is never out of his mind. He is an expatriate, and he cannot celebrate the new country as Lilia, the daughter of the Indian family, can celebrate the American functions, American rites and rituals. So this is the basic difference between immigration and immigrants and expatriates. But both these, and along with other people, they are all diasporic people. Okay, because diaspora has been accepted as an umbrella term, including many groups of people. I hope I have answered you.
Professor, the next question is, can we see the idea of home and homeland in the novels of Rohinton Mistry? Sorry, the homeland and hostland. Can we see the idea of homeland and hostland in the novels of Rohinton Mistry?
Very interestingly, you see, there are two things to consider. Many of the writers like Rohinton Mistry or Bharati Mukherjee or Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni or anybody who belong to the post-colonial diaspora, they write about their homeland. Okay, in the sense that they remember in the way they remember the homeland, because most of them are first generation immigrants, diasporic people. They have vivid ideas of the homeland, and that is what they know best. So when they start writing about them, obviously they talk about the homeland. But even when they talk about the homeland, and these people have already started thinking about, many of them, in fact, have already decided that the new country is their new homeland. And when they write about the old homeland, which has now become a different ancestral country, even then they write from a location that is called the diasporic location. They are the in-between people. They are the people who are writing from a hybrid position. So the position, they are writing about hostland, they are writing about homeland, but their location in the hybrid area is never erased. Point of view, these writers of course write about homeland, but basically mostly they write about homeland. There is certain difference in the writings of Bharat Democratic for instance, Jasmine or other in the later novels or the earlier novels, Wife for example, even in the early novels, she thinks of India as a foreign country. She thinks of India as an ancestral country which belongs to the past, not in the present. So not only Rohinton Mistry, but other writers also write about homeland, think about homeland. Most of them write from the hybrid positions, hybrid cultural locations. But then many of them, some of them also think that they belong to the new country altogether. The new country has become their home.
Professor, the next
Yes.
question is, how can we relate diaspora with multiculturalism? How can we relate diaspora with multiculturalism?
As I have already told, multiculturalism is related to one particular space, one particular state. Okay, it depends on which country you are in, whether that particular country practices multiculturalism. Okay, so if you are in diaspora, for example, you are in England or you are in the US or Canada, all these countries practice multiculturalism. Okay, now your location, the diasporic people's location, the location of the diasporic subject matters. That subject may go from a multicultural country like India, but he or she may also go from a country which is not multicultural. Okay, Afghanistan or Pakistan or from any other country like that, for example. So for them, it will be, for those diasporic people, it will be a big shift. For Indians, it will be a shift, but the basic principles are the same. Okay, the way it has been, it is being practiced, may differ from one country to another. In New Zealand, it has been practiced in one certain way, and New Zealand actually earns accolades of people from different countries. But in the US, you may have a tough time. For example, the policy of Mr. President Trump is often a stumble for many multiculturalists from India or Pakistan or from any other country like that. So it is a shift for the diasporic subject. So the relationship is more between the diasporic subject and the multiculturalism as practiced in the diaspora, rather than multiculturalism and diaspora.
Professor, another question. How does Aga Shahid Ali's poem Postcard from Kashmir deal with the homeland or hostland binary?
This is a very interesting question. Thank you for this. Aga Shahid Ali can never forget Kashmir. Okay, it is a lost post office, as you know. The post office functions as the agent or medium of communication. There is no post office in Kashmir. So he mourns that loss of communication. Okay, so for him, you know, Kashmir is more of a homeland than the rest of India because he hails from Kashmir. But then the diaspora is true for him as well. The diasporic reality is true for him as well. And personally, I believe that there is hardly any multiculturalist, cosmopolitan writer like him, because Aga Shahid Ali is an internationalist. If you read his poems, you will find that there are lots of references to many, many countries and philosophers and writers and cultural objects belonging to different countries. For example, intellectual writers from Russia. So you see that America, Russia, many other countries. So you see that for him, the homeland-hostland question was very, very problematic. It was not like that these are, as I said, a very stable kind of entities. But then for him, he took the position of an internationalist, somebody who moves around the world, who is a globalist, who believes in the citizenship, global citizenship. So from that point of view, for him, to a certain sense, the concept of the home and the homeland, or the concept of the hostland, becomes less important as well. When you think in terms of globality, you stop thinking in terms of, you minimize thinking in terms of the homeland and the hostland. But even then, your past is so forceful that you cannot forget them. So it is a peculiar kind of a situation.
Professor, another question. Do the diasporans really suffer?
Excuse me, in the diaspora?
Do the diasporans really suffer?
Do the diasporic people suffer?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. You see, as I said, it depends on the person, it depends on the community. If you think in terms of the old diaspora, they obviously suffer because there is a huge loss, okay? And there is hardly any gain. In the 19th century, for the 19th century diasporic people, be it from Europe or England or Europe or Australia, be it from America, whichever country they go, there was not the 21st century kind of situation where cultural dialogues is so much easy. So at that time, cultural dialogues were very, very difficult. So you see, these people suffered like anything. Okay, they cannot get ready touch with the homeland. Even at that time, they didn't have a telephone. Okay, so they didn't have internet. So they are suffering so a lot. But the sufferings is hugely lessened these days, where you can connect your parents, your countrymen, your country. As I'm doing, I'm connecting with the people of Madras or Madurai or other countries. You see other places. You see, this is through internet. This is through new technology. So obviously, there is certainly a loss in the beginning, of course, but the loss is not that huge. Okay, you can easily approach the persons you have lost. Okay, through in fact vicariously. Okay, through internet, through different means. You can call them. So you have vicarious connections with them. But it is relative. Okay. Earlier the loss was a huge one. Right now the loss is not that much. Of course, there is a loss in the initial phases. Of course.
Professor, this is a question from one of the participants in YouTube. Actually, does partition literature merge with diaspora? Does partition literature merge with diaspora?
Interesting. Yes, this again is a very interesting question, and I often raise this question. For example, can Indian partition of India in 1947 be called a diaspora? Think of Thamma, the character of Thamma in Shadowlights, the Shadowlights. You see, India was one when she actually moved. Later, India became two. Okay, so the same country which is being fragmented And a person who moves from Dhaka to Kolkata, can he or she be called a diasporic person? This is a very interesting question. But my answer is that partition literature, the people who moved to a different nation altogether in the rise of the new nations, they moved from one nation to another. That has already become one nation, another nation. Okay? So from that point of view, it is a movement from one nation to another. And this is a position usually taken by the critics that partition literature also produced a movement of transnational movement. So from that point of view, I also feel that, yes, okay, a person who moved from Bangladesh to India, he or she may certainly be called a diasporic people, because there is no better word here. But then the same question may also be asked, if a nation at one point of time was one, the parts of Bangladesh was also my country. So if I move from Kolkata to Delhi, shall I be called diaspora? Not certainly. It is an internal movement, internal migration. But then in this case, what happened is that you move from Dhaka to Kolkata, but in the meantime, Dhaka has become a different country altogether, a different nation altogether. So ultimately, it comes to the point, to this point, that you have become a diasporic person. Very intelligent question. Thank you for the question.
Professor, we have one more question. How to differentiate
Yes.
Indo-Anglian
Yes.
literature and diasporic literature?
There is problem about that in the sense that today we do not usually use the term Indo-Anglian. Okay. You see, the movement of the terms are also very important. At one point of time, it was Anglo-Indian. Then ultimately it became Indo-Anglian. Anglo-Indian writing was those, the British people settled in India who were writing in English were called Anglo-Indian people. Kipling, for example. Then that term was not in currency, it became Indo-Anglian. Then it became Indian writing in English. Then right now we usually call it Indian English writing, IEL. Okay. You see, many writers have actually accepted this term. So I understand what you mean. M.K. Nayak does not use the term Indo-Anglian. He uses the term Indian English writing. But then Indian English writing or Indo English writings, these people, Indo-Anglian writers, these people write from their own location. Okay, and their subject matters are determined by that fact. It is the lived experience that makes the differentiation. Okay, you write of your own people, okay, from one point of view, from your own point of view. You do not have to face that kind of hybrid situation, that kind of problematics of relationship with your neighbors. You write in one way, and your choice of topic, your questions of your topic is of one kind. Okay, if you think of Kantapura, for example, by Raja Rao, you can even think in terms of style. For the Indian writings English, you begin to think about style. The style and the language should be like that. The theme is the Indian, he says in his foreword, but the language we write is not Indian. So you will have to write about subject matter which is Indian, but not in a language which is foreign. So that is how Rajarao formulated your question. But you know that right now we think that English is not a foreign language. It is, it may be a second language, but it is not never a foreign language. It is one of the many languages that Indians speak in, and therefore it is a legitimate language to write in. So Indian English writing, the subject matter and style is determined by the lived experience, and the subject matter and the style is determined by the diasporic experience, lived experience of the diasporic people. Their location matters, even the subject matter matters, and when we say subject matters, you can write about a British subjects that is related to the life of Britain or life of America or life in Australia. You can write even about the Americans. You study about them. So it is easier for you. It is not that much easier for Indians to write. So this is the basic difference. So far, my idea goes.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your wonderful time. So you have given us a wonderful deliberations. Thank you so much, Professor. So let us go with the formal vote of thanks now. As the
Yeah, sure, yeah.
organizing secretary of the event, on behalf of Sourashtra College, I take this an opportunity to propose vote of thanks.
Okay.
At the outset, I thank our resource person, Dr. Himadri Lahiri, a poet, author, and professor, for consenting readily to our request and setting aside his quality time to provide us with the detailed and unique deliberations on the homeland, host land. So you have given a wonderful differentiation. What is homeland and what is host land? And you have also given a new perspective that we people are very much aware only of the diasporic literature that happens after the post-colonialism, but we are not very much aware of this, the coolie diaspora. So it was really wonderful where we have given a new idea, new perspective, and I believe that this, the perspective of the coolie diaspora should also be introduced to the students. Thank you, Professor, for enlightening us with your quality input. Thank you so much. I'm very much thankful to our Honorable Secretary for his motivation. I'd like to thank our Principal for his enthusiastic support. And my heartfelt thanks to all the participants. Thank you, one and all.